Good. So let's go. So again, welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Pierre Chanowski. I'm disaster risk management specialist at GFDRR. And we are going to discuss a new joint note between GFDRR and UNDRR on digital public goods for disaster risk reduction in a changing climate. And for that, we have with us today, so Niels Nielsen, who is the practice manager at GFDRR, part of the World Bank, and also together with us, Jenty Kirschwood, part of UNDRR, and we have been working together on that joint publication. I will do a quick overview of the note, and then we have three speakers who all contribute or promote digital public goods in the sector. So Deborah Tigua-Sapir, from CREED and with behind the MDAT historical disasters global data, Michael Marron, who is a board member of the OpenStreetMap Foundation, critical digital public goods when it comes to disaster risk reduction, and Jameson Wazin, who is part of the United Nations Digital Public Goods Alliance. Just a few practical details so that webinar is being recorded. We'll share the link after the presentation. We'll also share the link to the note and to the accompanying blog post. Okay, so let's start, and Niels, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pierre, and thanks a lot, everyone, for logging on. I see we have a pretty good crowd this morning on the East Coast here in the US. Good afternoon for those of you logging on from Europe or further east. Just a few words from me, mainly to thank Pierre and team and Jenty and her team and UNDRR for developing this work. The note aims to promote and explore ways that digital public goods can support disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation activities in developing countries. This is core, of course, to the GFDRR mandate and purpose as a global unit within the World Bank. We believe the publication in this particular moment is quite timely. As those of you operating in the DRR space are well aware, the Sendai Framework midterm review is ongoing and will conclude at the end of this month. At the same time, the World Bank Group is in a process of, I suppose, evolving. Some of you may have heard of the Evolution Roadmap. That does have a strong focus on global public goods. And for both of those two processes, we hope that this can become an input of value to put more focus on public goods for resilience in the digital space. As I mentioned, it is a direct result of a collaboration between UNDRR and GFDRR that we have agreed as part of our shared work plan. In particular, this one on risk knowledge and analysis, and for the purpose of supporting the implementation of the Sendai Framework for disaster risk reduction. We think the note aims primarily at an audience of governments, international development practitioners, but there's possibly value for private foundations and, of course, other institutions who are engaged in thinking about engaging in advancing digital public goods in the field of climate and disaster resilience. The intent of the note is to help stakeholders identify, create, and protect specific digital assets that should be or could be considered as digital public goods because of their high value with regards to disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. UNDRR and GFDRR have both been long-standing supporters of digital public goods and are recognized as such. The note is the first step to a new common agenda we hope will rally more partners and open up specific conversations. And from our side at GFDRR, this note is one piece of a larger puzzle, focusing on our ability to mobilize Earth observation, digital partnerships in the space of Earth observation and other digital technologies, a collaboration that we have started and built around an ongoing and long-standing collaboration with the European Space Agency, which is an important provider of public goods for our sector. So a special thanks to Genty and the UNDRR team for the great collaboration with GFDRR, and also, of course, to our peer reviewers. Back to you, Pierre.
Thanks a lot, Niels. And so over to you, Genty. I didn't give your title. So Genty is head of the Global Risk Analysis and Reporting at UNDRR. So over to you.
No, thank you very much, Pierre, and thank you very much, Niels and colleagues today. I think it's a really great opportunity, and I'll be brief because I'd like to get into the meat of the note and to be able to hear from some of the other discussants. But just really wanting to echo that that thanks to all of the team, both at GFDRR, but many of the other organizations that contributed to this work, that helped us in the peer review, and to really echo Niels's point that the timing, I think, here is critical. And it's really a unique moment where we have, increasing challenges to resilience building, but we also have incredible developments within the information sphere, within the data sphere, that make the strong call of the Sendai framework for more clear and interoperable and accessible and usable quality data all the more important. And this paper, which is really honing in on that issue of digital public goods, I hope is helping give some of the glue to a number of different initiatives that can begin to get data more effectively used for decision making. It's very clearly at the center of Sendai. It's very much coming out in the midterm review. And I hope that what we're going to see more and more is opportunities where open data or more accessible data, and particularly core digital public goods, can be used to really empower decision making and to reduce the digital divide, so that many countries who've really been struggling to understand their risk profiles, have been struggling to get the kind of data that will help them make the most informed decisions, both for this risk reduction now, but also in a complex climate future, to really help reduce that digital divide and make sure that those countries are able to, develop their tools, develop their capacities, and really apply some of that data to inform their decisions. Because it's really clear that open data can both, fuel better decision making, but also innovation. And it enables, people all around the world to make informed decisions, to act, to improve data, and also to really leverage the human capacity in their own countries to look at solutions that fit their needs and really can build resilience in their context. So we're very excited to have worked with the colleagues to develop the paper. We're even more excited to work with you all to make, hopefully digital public goods a real focus of resilience building moving forward, and to see this collaboration deepen with many of the actors on the call, and look forward to the questions and discussions today. So I'll stop there, and thanks again all, and wishing every success in moving this to the next stage.
Thanks a lot, Genty. So let's get a short overview of the publication. And maybe, first of all, I think we would all agree that it would be great to have all digital public goods for disaster risk reduction. But of course, there are some trade-offs to be made. And I think the intent of that note is really to help us to think about what kind of trade-off, what kind of strategy we should adopt, and how digital public goods, what are the critical digital public goods, those that have a very high value for the sector, should be developed, protected, or promoted. So again, it's a joint collaboration between UNDRR and GFDRR. It's quite short note. It's about 35 pages. It's based on multiple discussions and inputs from more than 40 people from the sector on what they think should be available as digital public goods for disaster risk reduction. And again, we hope this is the beginning of maybe new partnerships, more in-depth conversation on specific gaps when it comes to disaster risk information. And so maybe on the introduction, an observation that also there have been a large number of, let's say, vulnerable and low-income countries that still don't have access to critical digital public goods, such as on exposure, their own exposure to the the climate risk, we are making progress, and we are making progress because I think there is a realization also from the private sector that digital public goods can be really a win-win situation. For instance, when it comes to the reinsurance industry, there is no more and more initiatives so that we have greater interoperability between the different risk models, but also greater access to data from low economies. I like to use that slide to start the discussion about what should be information that should not needed as digital public goods per se, but that is critical for disaster risk. So it's taken from the IPCC report. I think the first author was UNDRR. It's so the different components of disaster risk. And so you will see that we need, of course, information on exposure. So exposure of the people, exposure of the infrastructures. We need information on the hazards themselves, the characteristics of those hazards. And we need information that combine both. So the vulnerability of population infrastructures to specific hazards and to a specific location. And that's going to give you an idea of a risk. And of course, with climate change, we also need a new type of information, which is the influence of the climate on the different hazards. And all that is information that the global community will need. And unfortunately, many of those information are still missing for the countries that we want to support. So on digital public goods, maybe you heard that a few years ago, there was that report from the United Nations on digital cooperation. And the idea and the intent is really to try to promote digital public goods as a way for collaboration, digital collaboration, and also as a way to solve very specific issues in different sectors. So the way that the United Nations define digital public goods is anything from open source software, open data, open models, open artificial intelligence models, but also open standards and open contents that have that particular characteristic that they can be used by anyone without restricting the use by others. Of course, attached to that are the questions and issues of data privacy. We don't want those technologies to do harm, which is a very hot topic at the moment with artificial intelligence and new technologies such as ChatGPT. But that's the type of assets that we are talking about. So we tried to do in the note a brief history of digital public goods for disaster risk reductions. And so we found that that quote from a mathematician, Fried Richardson, in 1922, which is who is one of the inventor of the weather forecast modelings. And he wrote in a book that perhaps someday in the dim future, it will be possible to advance the computations faster than the weather advance and at a cost less than the saving to mankind due to the information gain. I'm not sure he was referring to digital public goods per se, but I think there is a lot of elements there regarding the access to information, the possibility to scale up access to information to the whole humanity, the idea on the benefits versus cost. That's all relates to actually the idea and the value of digital public goods. And then if you look closer to us, some other key dates related to digital public goods in the sector. So in 1972, the first NASA Landsat satellite providing satellite imageries for free. In 1986, the first catastrophic model by Karen Clark, who founded the Air Company. And then in 2010, the use of OpenStreetMap platform and the release of satellite imageries by private companies for the Haiti earthquake response, which was really a critical moment, I think, for the community, where when we realized really the value and the power of such platforms. And and then in 2019, the launch of the Oasis loss modeling framework, which is a framework so that developers of catastrophic models can compare and also improve their models altogether, thanks to greater interoperability and the use of open standards. So those are key dates. There are more in the note regarding what we think could be a brief history of digital public goods for disaster risk reduction. Now, so again, I think there has been a lot of nice initiatives and partnership around trying to promote the digital public goods. But there are challenges, and in particular, we saw with regards to the funding mechanisms and also the procurement mechanisms attached to not only international organizations but also governments, and the way we actually procure technologies, often based on the competitive procurement process, and which is challenging because by definition, a digital public goods is a collaboration, is a partnership. So how can we finance those type of resources? So maybe there are pooling mechanisms such as trust fund that could be developed specifically for those purposes. And then the role of international organizations and governments. And here we think that, so while international organizations, they might have the mandate to promote digital public goods and to drive the necessary resources, finance at the global level, government remain a key actor because of many reasons. First one, because that's the main user and let's say the main developer of digital public goods, but also because of the regulation that needs to be imposed on technology. So not only digital public goods, but all technologies that can be sometimes used for the good, for disaster risk reduction, but that can also cause a lot of issues, again, when it comes to privacy or when it comes to unintended consequences. And to conclude, so we try to draw a list of what we think are critical digital public goods that we hope to see developed in the sector. So I'm not going to list all the digital public goods, but maybe just a key critical ones. I think it's, so again, we are still lacking a lot of information on exposure. So it's critical. We support platforms, technologies, software that can help us to get more of those data from developing countries. Another element that is still missing is the vulnerability information. So it's very difficult. So when, for instance, you have a catastrophic model you want to apply to developing countries, it's very difficult because you don't have information on the exposure and you don't have information on the vulnerability of that exposure to hazard. And because of that, the result that you will get from that model will not be as accurate as it would be for a more advanced country. So those are the different examples where we might want to give a stronger push. I'm also thinking about digital commons, of course, OpenStreetMap, but also, for instance, the Wikipedia, how to use those technologies to maybe strengthen the knowledge on disaster risk information globally, but maybe also to make sure that, for instance, technologies such as AI that are feeding on those digital commons can give better answer when it comes to questions regarding disaster risk information. So, if, for instance, again, referring to ChatGPT, so it's feeding on everything that is available out there. So if we don't have the information, the relevant information, disaster risk information, then your machine learning or your artificial intelligence won't be able to provide you an accurate answer. So I think that's critical to continue to develop the basics, even though we have those new powerful technologies. So I will stop here so you can download the note. I will put the link in the chat. We also have a blog post that's just been published. So thanks again for your attention. And now I will ask our speakers to also discuss about the topic. So let me stop sharing. Good. And I will ask maybe Debbie Debarati-Gua who is from CREED and who has been behind the MDAT global dataset on historical disasters. And a special thanks to you, Debbie, because I know you're on vacation, so I really appreciate you joining us today. Over to you.
Voila. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pierre. Thank you for inviting me to this this panel. Yes, I am on vacation, but it's kind of nice to be in Tuscany and be speaking to all of you, and that's what technology has allowed us to do. Now, I read the abstract of the brief very carefully. Part of the reason is that, in fact, the brief itself doesn't seem to be easily publicly accessible. So you may want to, so you have to log in and register, I don't know what. So that might be something that you want to correct so that, you know, you get a wider accessibility of people in countries which don't have so much bandwidth or whatever. So what I've done is I have made just a few comments which I would like to share with you based on what I think has to be the future. So I've done this and that thing for the last 30 years. It's been a great success, but it has also reached a stage where we have to move on and go into a new world today in this century. So I will share with you some of my my comments on this. You mentioned procurement and some other items which to me are really at this time, marginal issues. They are downstream issues, they are marginal issues, and will be actually relevant, definitely, only when we have a decent global coverage of reliable data. Now, having said that, I want to also mention very emphatically that more data is not necessarily better data. And so we get carried away, the tail starts wagging the dog. And so we get carried away by technology, we carried away by more and more and more data. And if you ask anybody, like with my profile, they will say, oh, we don't have enough data. Well, let me put it on the table that we do have enough data right now. We do have enough data right now. And especially to something that you mentioned, Pierre, with relation to measuring exposure. I think that's a very important concept. And I think that's a concept that has been completely neglected. And what we do now is we almost always, not only MDAT, but many other databases, we provide numerator data. And numerator data is completely and totally useless if you don't have any denominators. And that's your exposure data. So until we deal with that, we are not going to get any credible data out, especially, and I would like to emphasize that as well, especially since if we want to have the impact of disasters to be taken more seriously, we are going to be dealing front on with sectors, mostly economic sectors. Trade and development, financial sectors. These are places who have excellent data, and they are very powerful. The second group of people we have to deal with in a confrontational way are the climate scientists and the meteorologists. They also have excellent data. They are very good data. Their models are really good. Meteorology has improved hugely in the last few years. We are really lagging behind on that. And here I would like to come to something key for my work, and personally, I think it should be also key to yours, that in addition to critical infrastructure, building stock, and so on and so forth, we have neglected, and I think to our cost, and this is something, a price we will have to pay, we have neglected capturing human impact. So we need to do a lot more work in trying to capture human impact. And again, I will come back to what I started with, saying that right now we have global data sets, and many of them with subnational data in them, many of them, global data sets, which can provide very high quality exposure data of populations, very high quality ecological and environment data, the Max Planck Earth Space Cube. And those different global data sets are not sufficiently used. And I think that would be my main recommendation to to UNDRR and to GFDRR is that some effort really to bring these global data sets, which exist at national and subnational levels, bring them together to be able to identify highly vulnerable groups and what their comparable rates are. So right now, what we have is we have numerator data, MDAT has numerator data, and these are not sufficient altogether to make any comparisons or make any trends that are credible. So that's essentially what I would like to say. I think we need to focus on the quality of data. That's a very big issue. Quality of data is simply not good enough. This means that we will never be taken seriously by all these other sectors. We need better quality data. We need to lobby the DHS or the LSMS, I think the Living Standard Measurement Surveys of the World Bank, these very good, very successful machines that we have. Those guys must be convinced to include some of disaster impact data in them. We should start up an initiative of a multi-centric standardized sample surveys to understand how, say, the really upcoming big issues like heat waves, wildfires, how do they affect human communities? And we need to set up a disaster impact data coalition with an harmonized platform with curated data that can be offered to the DRR community. And I believe that the data already exists. We are just not doing a good enough job in bringing them together. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thanks a lot, Debbie, and I really appreciate also that you brought a proposition of collaboration, and also I think it's very relevant to the current conversation on loss and damage conversation. So yes, would be nice to follow up. So I will now introduce our second speaker, Michael Maron, who is board member of the OpenStreetMap Foundation. So as you know, OpenStreetMap is the Wikipedia of maps that have been critical for the disaster risk community. So Michael, over to you.
Hey, Pierre. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. I put together a few images to guide my reflections from reading through the node and also just thinking back on what we have done in OpenStreetMap and in humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. You see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So briefly, yeah, I came up with not all considerations, but I think 3 considerations for thinking about what makes for successful digital public goods. First one, and this is very key to the formation of humanitarian OpenStreetMap team within OpenStreetMap, is the notion of relying on everyday goods. So in a time of crisis, what people reach for are the things that they use every day, things that are at hand. And that was a notion early on, way before OpenStreetMap was basically the base map geodata set for pretty much everything, was use something that people are using every day to get a cup of coffee, make it, that data set would be just as useful in time of trying to respond in the middle of a disaster. This is how we treat public goods, by the way. We don't create roads especially for fleeing a hurricane. These are the same roads we use every day, but we augment them with information or with special considerations to do things like, you know, evacuate ahead of a storm. Secondly, private sector, entangling with the private sector, because it is complicated. Pierre, you mentioned the Haiti earthquake and the response, and you're absolutely right. OpenStreetMap and HOT would not have been able to respond if it wasn't for the likes of Google and Maxar, then Digital Globe, releasing very recent imagery for digitization by the global community. And I think that Debarati's comments as well on the data is out there. It's often in the private sector or in complicated places, finding ways to create the enabling conditions to leverage that data better is really essential. Again, on the theme of every day, you know, Waffle House is here in the United States is an integral part of a disaster response and measuring disasters, and people rely on it day in and day out, but also to get a hot meal after a hurricane. But this comes with so many complexities because the private sector is fickle. The incentives are always to, you know, to what is going to keep the company going. And Meta, Facebook has done incredible work with data for good. And here's some of the results from their work with Crisis Ready, their mobility data. But, you know, within, I think, the most recent round of layoffs at Meta, many of the engineers involved with creating data for good data sets were let go. I don't know what that means for the future of the public goods that Meta had been contributing, but certainly there's going to be some kind of impact. So there are really interesting models out there. One group that I'm kind of an observer on is Open Source Climate, which is housed under the Linux Foundation. And this is a group primarily led by, you know, financial institutions like BNP and others who had been doing in-house risk modeling, but realized that coming together, leveraging the data they already had, data that was out there, and putting it to use in a way that helped them to assess their portfolios, but could also help others, was just beneficial overall. But that's taken quite a lot of careful cultivation over years. And so that's my third point is leadership. And I kind of debated whether to make this one relationships, but I think it's always about, there's always a need for, I think, for the success of a digital public good to have someone who has a vision, a passion, and who can cultivate relationships and bring people together. We can't forget the individuals and the people that make this happen. So I'm involved through my work at Earth Genome in Climate Trace, which is an effort to collect and share greenhouse gas emissions on every emitting source around the world. And this is led by Al Gore, and his vision brings together a pretty big coalition of actors who might have a hard time figuring out how to work together, despite the, you know, whatever intentions, without someone kind of showing the way and cultivating the relationships with everyone who's involved. I think Open Data Kit is another success story in this regard. Ya was part of the original team that built Open Data Kit. It's one of the key digital public goods out there for collecting mobile data, and it's been through a lot over almost 20 years, and a lot of that is due to, you know, Ya's persistence and just really being a great cultivator of a space for people to contribute. And finally, I think just one of your colleagues there at the bank, you know, Holly's Krambeck's work on the Development Data Partnership, which is a kind of trying to create a model for private sector public goods engagement. I think a lot has been to the, you know, the heart and soul that she puts into that effort. So those are my 3 points, and I will stop there.
Thanks a lot, Michael. And it's good you mentioned the issue, or I mean the issue of maybe sometimes depending on the resources or information from the private sector, such as in the case of Meta, and something that we are following closely, of course, because our involvement with setting a framework to use such mobility data in the case, for instance, of the Syria earthquake response. And of course, it's opened up a lot of questions with regards to the sustainability of those critical assets once they have been developed. So it would be nice to continue conversation on that. And now to our third and final speaker, so Jenson Voisin from the UN Digital Public Goods Alliance. And Jenson, I know you have been coordinating work on digital public goods on climate change adaptation. So over to you.
Great, thanks for having me. I'm just gonna share my screen up here. And Can you all hear? Great. Fantastic. All right. First off, I would just want to start off by saying a big thank you to the organizers for inviting the Digital Public Goods Alliance to participate. Having had read the executive summary and taking a quick peek at the full report, it's a valuable piece to add to the ecosystem in discussing the potential value of and impact that digital public goods can have. So my name is Jameson. I serve as the Senior Advisor for the Digital Public Goods Alliance. And what the Digital Public Goods Alliance is a multi-stakeholder initiative that was launched in 2019 to help accelerate the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals by facilitating the discovery, development, use of, and investment in digital public goods. So that is in direct relation to the report that Pierre had initially mentioned, which actually defined what digital public goods are in this context. The Digital Public Goods Alliance was founded by UNICEF, the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, Sierra Leone, and iSpirit, an Indian think tank. But we bring together nearly 30 members spanning across academia, philanthropy, governments, multilaterals, NGOs, and more. And the idea here is that we would like to bring different groups together to facilitate the cooperation that we need to see in order to make the promise of digital public goods a reality. So up here on the screen right now, you see a snapshot of who our current members are, but it's also growing rapidly, which we're really excited to see. Now we look at digital public goods from a sector agnostic perspective. So we're looking to advance DPGs in not only climate change adaptation, which I'm going to lean into in just a second here now, but across all different sectors. We see this of particular value in the health sector, where there's been a number of digital public goods used specifically for pandemic response. But we're also seeing a large increase in interest in using digital public goods as countries look to develop their digital public infrastructure. So they're digital foundations as a country. So when we look at that, we're looking at digital IDs, information mediators, and cash transfers. But in our work and related to climate change adaptation really comes to light through our communities of practice work. So the Digital Public Goods Alliance brings together communities of practitioners to focus on a specific sector and to identify the ways that digital public goods can make an impact. So last year we had hosted a community of practice focused around climate change adaptation, which accumulated in the release of this report up here, which called for weather, climate, and hydrological information data sets to be made open and freely available as digital public goods. And this was a call that was co-authored not only with the WMO, but with ITU as well. So what I'm going to do now is take a moment to provide a snapshot into some of the findings that we, or some of the statements that we released within that report, which I think really complements a lot. That was not only within your own report that we're here discussing today, but complements what we've heard by our previous speakers as well, which is really exciting. And I think the idea there, and Deb, I agree with you wholeheartedly, is that it's not necessarily about getting access to more data. It's about getting access to quality data and unlocking the data that does exist. So when it comes down to trying to make data digital public goods, some of the key challenges that we identified in this report are up here on the screen right now. So broadening an understanding of the role that data plays, I'd say that we're seeing quick movement to a more promising space in this regard. But I think the data standards, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So it's not just about making data available or unlocking it, but it's making sure that it's interoperable with one another and that's useful data. Again, here, and I think we see how this complement throughout the report that we're here discussing today, is that the resources. So we need financial and technical resources needed in order to adequately collect, store, and distribute the data. And another challenge that we're seeing in the resource space is that the economic value of data has been made unrestricted and difficult. And this is by and large part to the private sector starting to realize the value that data holds from a economic value, and therefore opening it up to make it freely available is can be challenging at times. And then again, here we have at the bottom, just broadly speaking, looking at policy and practices. So data is siloed, and just because it exists, let's look at governments, for example. It may exist within one ministry, but is it accessible across all ministries? Is it accessible to the general public to use as well? So in terms of recommendations for how we could ensure that weather, climate, and hydrological data sets are available as digital public goods, some of the things that we identify are that we would like to see commitments made to open access. But not only do we want to hear commitments, but we want to make sure that they're measurable. So we want to make sure that if the private sector or governments are saying that they're going to make access available, we want to make sure that we could hold them accountable to those commitments. Second to that, we want to encourage inclusive private and public sharing. So we need to see an open, inclusive approach to stimulate entrepreneurship, innovation, and productive competition. We know that digital public goods can be the breeding ground for that. So we'd like to see that governments and private sector work together to create that enabling environment. Second to that is a lot of the work that governments are doing right now is safeguarding data policies and ensuring that it's ethical in the ways that they're sharing it and whatnot. And we totally agree with that. But we also need to make sure that that's not where their role ends here. We need to make sure that, and we've heard this again earlier today, is that they're focusing on their own open data policies and that they're sharing it back with civil society, multilaterals, and the private sector. Increase public sector support and funding. So we want to make sure that it's not only short term. We're seeing a lot of funding flood in for specific projects, but when that project wraps up, then what's next is what we need to be looking ahead at. And then, and I think this goes without saying, is that we're developing the standards and practices, best practices for open data. So we've heard this again already, is that we need to make sure that it's shareable across the board, but it's useful in order to unlock the potential here. So those are just some quick remarks. Again, congratulations to the team on the release of this report. We're very excited about it and looking forward to moving this discussion forward.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Jameson. And thanks again for all the work with the Digital Public Goods Alliance, which was clearly an influence and an inspiration to our work as well. It's good. I think you mentioned the issue of interoperability. I know it's not a sexy one, but I think it is critical, for instance, to be able to better compare between different information. Something that actually we are doing very well at the bank, on the poverty data, but on disaster risk, we still have to do some progress on that. We have developed actually what we call a risk data library standard for that purpose, but something that we like to rally other contributors and users. So I'm now going to open up the conversation to participants who may have a comment or questions to speakers. So anyone who would like to speak, please raise your hand and ask any question. Yes, Genty.
Perhaps, Pierre, if I may, first of all, thank you so much to the panelists. I think that those were really, really great, very, very rich interventions. I guess building on this sort of common agreement that this is so important to move forward, I wonder what some of the panelists might reflect on in terms of where some of the key policy gaps might be, or some of the structural gaps, and where the lowest hanging fruit might be to really create a more open global agenda. And particularly if they've got any thoughts also on some of those transboundary data management issues and accessibility on data sets. Thanks very much.
Anyone on that one?
I'll jump in with a thought, and I think I would wait on structural rather than policies. One thought is that it really helps to bring people together in the room who are actually working with digital public goods on a particular thing, and facilitate that, the element of collaboration among folks. I think that gets to, to Deborati's points about the data is there, it's just not being shared and leveraged in the way the way that is ultimately most useful. And so I think the bank and the UN both have incredible convening power, and something we don't see enough of are actually creations of spaces where digital work could get done together. We're often, So I'd love to see more of that.
More collaboration. Debbie?
Yeah, thanks. I'll just pick up on what Mikhail said. And somebody else said before that. The Genti, I think what we are missing now, what has happened in the last, say, 10, 15, 20 years, and I'm talking about, say, my experience with MDAT, it was established 30 years ago, and we plodded along for 30 years, and as I said, this is a time to move on, really. Now, where do we move on? Because we are not the only ones. We are a very good example of something that's, I think, either Jameson or Mikhail said about siloed data. I mean, this is a huge problem, this siloed data. The many data sets, global data sets, have high quality data. They have global coverage. And many of them now, to my surprise and admiration, many of them now have even subnational data. I mean, I have a group of 6 global data sets, of which 3 or 4 of them have subnational data. We don't, but they have subnational data, satellite plus modeling and things. Now, what I think we are missing here now, I know it's going to sound a little bread and butter and, a bit too maybe down to earth, while you guys are quite stratospheric actually in your thinking, both of you, is there is lacking, and I think the Bretton Woods institutions or the UN there would be able to come in somewhere, is we are lacking quite a pragmatic framework within which these global data sets can be brought in. Now, I was just hurriedly looking through where Jameson works, I didn't even know it existed. That looks like a very good framework. But I think if the UN could come in with its background and its credibility to create a framework without I'm saying it advisedly, without hamstringing the proposition, because the UN is well known. I'm sorry, you will forgive me, Genti, I think we go back some years together, is well known to hamstring, and it becomes difficult to go ahead. So if you can get something off the ground that doesn't hamstring a structure, that has a pragmatic structure, that brings in these 5, 6, 7, 8, they're not that many, brings them in and forces them, and people are ready to do that. That would be a huge step forward,
Debbie, appreciate your candidness. And Jameson?
Sure, I'll jump in now. And I guess just before I go too much further, one clarification is that the Digital Public Goods Alliance is not actually, we don't sit within the UN directly. We were born as, we're endorsed by the United Nations, and we are a recommendation made by the UN, but we do operate as a separate entity. And we are thankful to have a number of members that are UN bodies. So like the UNDP, UNICEF, Food and Agriculture Organization. So we work really closely with them. And I think that's actually a point of privilege for us to try and slowly change attitudes and behavior as members from within. And we're actually starting to see a lot of these multilaterals begin to work with one another in creating an environment where they could connect. But back to the core question about like what needs to be done here. And I think this goes a little bit outside of, so much of the conversation this morning has geared towards access to data, but it's also understanding that digital public goods are much more than just open data sets itself. And when I look at a lot of the problems that we hear from governments that they're facing is that in order to adopt new solutions that are digital public goods, so if we're looking at software, for example, the environment doesn't exist for them to easily adopt it from a procurement policy perspective. So it's open source. So that's a little bit different in nature than what it's like to getting a proprietary solution in place. And so much of the structures that we see in countries, specifically low and middle income countries, that when they're looking for solutions, by default, the architecture has been created to make proprietary solutions easier to adopt. And we don't think that's going to be the long-term success that needs to be made. So I think when we're looking at what does it mean to take on a new solution, and looking at procurement policies and looking at the capacity to maintain them over time, I think that's something that we really need to pivot the conversation to think about a little bit.
Yes, thanks a lot, Jensen. And maybe to to follow up on that, I think it's also important to think about the type of digital public goods you can build the community around, and you can build a methodology for uptake around. And again, I will take the example of the OpenStreetMap. Why the OpenStreetMap is so successful in the development sector? It is because it provides a way for development organizations, government, NGOs on the ground to build methodologies of intervention for people to learn about the technology, to learn about the information, to learn about the issues they are trying to solve. And I think it's nice to try to tie the digital public good that's sometimes are very top down to the local methodology and way of doing things of the different communities. Do we have any other comment or question? No? Okay, so maybe it's time to wrap up. I might ask for a closing remark for two co-chairs, Niels and Genty. Maybe Niels first.
I think I'll limit myself to say thanks a lot to all of you who have been listening in here, learning a lot. Clearly there's much more to do, no? And I think we have a, not surprising given we're talking about public goods, we have a large collective action challenge that we won't solve anytime soon. GFDRR depends on the availability of digital public goods in terms of the work and value proposition we try to provide into development finance equations. So we will certainly stay at it. We hope we will stay engaged with all of you and then some, and see if together we can overcome the collective action problem. But thanks a lot, everyone, for this conversation. It's been fascinating and super interesting. Genty.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, just to really echo the huge thanks both to those who worked on the reports and also to the panelists today. I think it's been a really rich discussion, and I'm really heartened to see the high degree of concurrence in terms of views and the sense of, the need to just pragmatically get to work to make this happen. I'm actually in London right now, having some conversations with the Insurance Development Forum around some of these issues about how it might be possible to get more data in a more standardized way into the public domain. And I know that there are other meetings going on at the same time around, ways of better standardizing disaster data and recording. And I've seen a real uptake also in a number of the private sector sort of mass data, crowdsourcing type data providers also being, looking at how they leverage their data. And that's sort of building on the satellite data that, started to come online, 5-10 years ago. So I think it's a really, really exciting moment. And I also think there's just no time to lose. We clearly are not on track to reducing resilience at the rate we need to keep track with climate change and with a number of different other demographic risk drivers. So I think this, getting this right is utterly essential to those efforts of accelerating risk reduction. And I'm really hoping that, yes, we can continue this conversation and this collaboration and, find ways of, as Debbie said, just actually practically putting this into something that people can, can use as a framework to collaborate moving forward. So huge thanks to all, and wish you all a great day, and thanks so much for joining.
Thanks a lot, Genty, Niels. Thanks, everyone. So the note is online. We'll make sure the abstract is online as well. And so please do share, get back to us, and hopefully we'll get in touch soon. Bye-bye.